Okay, so today we are going to be looking at how to analyze the unseen poem in poetry. So, for those of you who are a little bit worried about how to analyze the unseen part of the poem, this video is for you. So, this is hopefully going to provide some tips and tricks to help you analyze the unseen poem. Okay, so this first tip might seem pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised how often people don't do this. Read the poem. So read the unseen poem. Read it once, read it twice. It will only take about a minute or so for you to read it, but reading the poem, reading it sentence by sentence, is really going to help you. Now, like I said, this may seem like a bit of a silly tip because obviously you're going to read the poem, but it's hard to take things in when you're under timed conditions. I understand how hard that is because it is stressful to try to absorb new information when your brain is on hyper alert and you're aware that you're on your GCSE exams, that you have a ticking timer. But the important thing is to calm yourself down, to take a few deep breaths, to take a few calming breaths, and then engage with the poem. Now, what I like to do in order to make sure that the poem actually absorbs into my brain while I read it is actually create a brief summary next to every sentence or every 2 or 3 sentences. Just read what the sentence is saying, and then next to the sentence, just write a brief summary. So you have the first few sentences, just write a bit of a summary. The next few sentences, write a bit of a summary. Next few sentences, write a bit of a summary. This will help you absorb the poem a lot better, trust me. So take a few deep breaths and then do a little bit of summary next to each of the sentences. Okay, then we've got tip number 2, which is to pick out language devices which you recognize. So essentially, the first thing you should be doing once you've actually read the poem and you've written your little summaries out on the side, especially if it is a bit of a difficult poem to absorb, writing those summary notes on the side of each sentence is really going to help you feel a lot calmer and also have it written down there. Next, you're going to be picking out your language devices. Now, this is something which by this point should come naturally to you. Even if you think that you're not so good at analysing language, it will come a lot more natural to you because the whole 2 years of your GCSEs, you will be used to analysing language. You won't know it until you're actually there under timed conditions, but you've actually kind of been trained to analyse language and to analyse structure. And so it should come quite naturally to you to find a metaphor where there is a metaphor or a simile where there's a simile. So I've written here, even if you don't quite understand the poem, hopefully you'll have a gist of it. Hopefully you'll understand the words that are coming out to you. Or maybe if there's some repetition, you could underline that repetition. There you go, you've got a structural device. What word is repeated? Why is that word repeated? Remember, everything that a poet does is on purpose. And hopefully these language devices that you pick out should add more depth to the poem. I've written here, picking out language devices is your safety net. And I say this because say you get given a poem that you don't quite understand, even after writing little summary notes on the side of each sentence, say you still don't understand it. The first protocol that you should be doing is analysing language. The more you analyse language, the easier it will get for you to understand the poem. For example, when we look at the poem London, there is the metaphor of mind-forged manacles. Now, say London was your unseen poem. Say you had no idea what London is about. You're very confused, you're stressed, you're getting a bit, agitated. And then you see this metaphor, the mind-forged manacles I hear. Now, this metaphor should give you a better understanding of what the poem is about. When you do read Mind-Forged Manacles, that strikes out that the poem is about being trapped or crime because of that word manacles. What about mind forged? This idea that the poem must be about people's minds being shaped or reshaped. And through this metaphor, even if you don't quite understand the poem, you get this gist, don't you, that actually the poem is about something negative, that the poem is about being trapped, that the poem is about crime, that the poem is about people's minds. And this gives you a better understanding of the poem. This is why poets actually include language devices. The whole purpose of a language device is to give you that added depth into the poem. It gives you that added understanding of what the poem is about. Think of language devices such as metaphors, similes, repetition, symbolism. Think of these kind of language devices as looking below the surface of the poem. So here's the poem. Say the poem is this line. These language devices are underneath that line. They're that bit underneath which add depth, which give you more substance, which make you kind of look at the meaning behind the poem. So the language devices add that extra layer, extra depth, extra boost to a poem, and it gives you a better understanding of what the poem is about. So even if you don't quite understand what the poem could be about upon the first few readings, the language devices should help you. For example, alliteration has similar sounds. If you look at alliteration, you see that a certain sound is being repeated. Maybe think about what that certain sound suggests to you. So for example, if there's a lot of sibilance, if there's a lot of that S sound, is that particularly positive? Is it particularly negative? What could that hissing sound be doing? Positive and negative metaphors add depth to the poem. So as I was saying, what does that metaphor suggest? What does that metaphor make you think of? How does that metaphor enrich the poem? Next, I've got the title of the poem. Now, this, again, I think is a point that is a little bit obvious and on the nose, but incredibly important. Now, usually, and I say usually, with the unseen poem, every part of that poem is done on purpose, okay? It's added on your exam paper for a reason, and every part of the poem should be analysed, including the title. Think about the poem Tissue, for example. If you look at our analysis of tissue, the title tissue, that noun, is part of the poem. Okay, and I talk about how the title tissue is the top part of the poem, and then the poem continues on to explain what the definition of tissue is. I've also got an example here, My Last Duchess. The title has my in it, so straight away that pronoun my in My Last Duchess in the title should make you think about who is speaking. Now, as we read the poem, we realise that it is the Duke speaking about his last Duchess, but this pronoun my is incredibly important and it should be analysed, even though it is part of the title. The Duke is possessive, and so he uses this possessive pronoun my. What about last? What does last suggest? Perhaps it suggests that the Duchess is dead in this case. It definitely suggests that the Duchess is dead. It gives a sense of being last. It gives a sense of being perhaps last in the finishing line. Think about that noun Duchess. You know, this idea that she doesn't have a name, that even in the title, the most important part of the poem, the part of the poem which introduces the actual content of what the poem is going to be about. It's about a duchess. It's about a noble woman. It's about a woman who has her identity taken away from her. She is not a human being almost. She is a duchess. Think about Checking Out Me History, for example. That is a very interesting title, adds a lot of depth to the poem. You get this image of a man poring over these books, discovering things about his history, his ancestors, what they went through. It's this very personal idea which can really be picked up on in the title, and it's not actually mentioned in the actual content of the poem. There's never a line which says I am checking out my history, but it's implied because of the title. It's implied and actually explicitly implied because of the title, and you get this kind of idea that it's very personal to the speaker. You've got this me checking out me history, my history, again a possessive pronoun. It's about the speaker or the poet's history. It's very personal to him, and this adds a real dimension, a personal dimension to the poem. So the title is very, very important. Next tip, it seems pretty obvious, but be creative. So what impressions do you get from the poem? It's not about what you think the examiner wants to see from you. It's about what you feel when you are reading a poem. I think a lot of students forget there's a reason that poetry is called art. It's about the poet being creative. It's about the poet conveying a topic or many topics through a really creative form. And so when you're reading the poem, it's welcomed that you also be creative. It's important that you also, when you're analysing the poem, be creative. Now, a poem is never ever meant to be taken as just one thing, as one block. Oh, this poem Ozymandias is about Ozymandias. Okay, we know that. That's obvious. Obviously, the poem is about Ozymandias. It's called Ozymandias. A poem is meant to be read with a lot of depth, with a lot of dimensions. So the poem Ozymandias, yes, it's about Ozymandias, but does it convey Ozymandias as an impressive leader, or does it convey Ozymandias as a very harsh and evil ruler? Does it convey Ozymandias as arrogant and powerful, or does it convey Ozymandias as a little bit pathetic and full of ego? And if it does convey Ozymandias as maybe one or two or all of those things, how does it do that? The important thing about analysing a poem isn't about picking out that something is a metaphor, that something is a simile, that something is sibilance. It's about picking that out and then analysing how that makes you as a reader feel. If you read sibilance in a poem, how does that make you feel? Does it make you feel uneasy? Does it make you feel happy? Does it make you feel a certain type of way? And if it does, why? So be creative and trust your instinct when you're reading a poem and it makes you feel a certain way. Why? That is probably done on purpose. So trust yourself. Trust that you are an expert at reading poetry at this point. A very, very important point that I think is stressed a lot, but I'm going to add it onto here anyway because it's incredibly important. Always make a plan. So the best way to make a plan is, like I said before in the first point, create a little summary next to the poem, next to each sentence, especially if it's a poem that's a little bit hard to understand upon the first read. Read it again and make your little summary notes. Pick out words which stick out to you, pick out language devices which stick out to you. There you go, you got yourself a plan. Annotate your copy of the poem. That is a very important point. I think if you're not annotating your poem, that is immediately a mistake. You need to be annotating your poem. And also mind maps are a great way to plan. So if you have annotated your poem to the death, you got your full choco-blocked annotated poem, it might help to get another sheet of paper and create a little mind map of some of the themes that you pick out. So yeah, that's incredibly important. Mind maps, very important to mind map themes that you pick out. We always underestimate themes when we are looking at an unseen poem, and it always helps to go in with a bigger picture and then kind of take your little microscope and then go deeper and deeper and deeper. Always start off with simple things that pop up to you. So for example, if we were analysing Ozymandias, obviously there is a sense of leadership or kingship or monarchy in the poem. So you can write that, monarchy, and then pick out a few lines. And then what does that do for the poem? And of course, give yourself time to plan. It's incredibly important to leave yourself time to plan. Usually I like to give myself a good 10 minutes to plan. So that is a significant amount of time to actually structure what you're going to write about and really give yourself that kind of boost to actually begin writing with enthusiasm. So once you've got yourself quite a strong plan, you'll find that it's a lot easier to actually write your essay. Okay, so underrated again, but use the techniques you used in your other poems, in your scene poems. So it doesn't matter which cluster you're doing, but you should be used to analysing poems by now. Even if you think you're really bad and that you're terrible at analysing poems, no, that's not true. You are an expert, okay? You're a pro at analysing poems. The only difference is you haven't seen this poem. That's it. That's the only difference. Have you ever written that out? The only difference between this poem and a poem that you have prepared for is that you haven't seen this poem. And that's it. So the techniques that you use to analyse Ozymandias, checking out my history, Porphyria's lover, or exposure, whatever you're doing, those techniques can be transferred to this new poem. If you're looking at sibilance in Ozymandias, you can very well look at the way that alliteration or perhaps sibilance works in this new poem, if there is sibilance or alliteration in this new poem, and maybe it has a similar effect. If you're looking at the way that repetition works in London, for example, you can look at the way repetition works in this unseen poem and perhaps it has a similar effect. Don't be afraid to mooch off your previous hard work, okay? You don't have to start off using new techniques or trying to be some kind of expert who discovers a new language device. You don't have to do that. Use your old language devices. They're there for a reason. Metaphor, similes, good old symbolism, good old semantic field. It's there for a reason. It's there for you to take it and use it in anything you analyze. So stop overthinking. You're a natural, you're a pro, you're good at what you're doing, you're used to it, you've analyzed poems before, you've done it your whole life, and now it's time for you to just analyze a new poem. Use your same techniques and just put it onto this new poem. You'd be surprised how far you get in actually creating new ideas through old ways of analysing. And practice analysing unseen poems as part of your revision. Make this part of your revision. The more you practice, the better. Incredibly important and valuable advice. It is a great idea to start practicing analysing unseen poems. So you can do this by analysing the cluster that you aren't doing. So if you are doing love and relationships, analyse the power and conflict cluster. If you're doing power and conflict, analyse the love and relationships cluster. Start off with that. Write essays on it. Look online and see what other people have analysed after you've analysed it. Go to your teacher and show them your analysis and have them mark it. That's what they're there for. They're there to help you. But practice what it's like seeing a new poem and analysing the techniques, and you'll find that you're getting better and better as you do it. So it's always a good idea to practice analysing fresh poems that you've never seen before. And that's it. That is my few top tips that I can give you to analyse unseen poems. And just to show you guys an example of me analysing a poem that I've never read before, I'm going to actually analyse this poem by Maya Angelou, which was on a past paper. It's called On Aging, so I'm going to use my own advice, and I'm going to start off by looking at the title of the poem. On aging. So obviously the poem is about aging, is the topic of the poem. When you see me sitting quietly like a sack left on the shelf. So immediately, that's a simile. And the simile is like a sack left on the shelf. So this simile, it's negative. And I want to point out that there's a personal pronoun here, me. And this personal pronoun really highlights that the subject is old. Remember, it's on aging. So the subject is old. When you see me sitting quietly like a sack left on the shelf, I immediately connect this title on aging to the subject herself. It's Maya Angelou, so I'm just going to say her as being old. And so she's comparing being old to being like a sack. More importantly, this verb left in the past tense, incredibly important. There's this sense of being an object, of being almost expired. There's this sense that Maya Angelou's subject is comparing herself to a sack because a sack is an object. It's heavy, it's left, it's forgotten. I can connect this simile to something negative. So being old is immediately being negative, right? It's seen as something negative. Notice how there's this pronoun you. It's direct address. So the reader is immediately addressed, okay? There's a sense of blaming the reader, and there's a sense of defensiveness. It's almost as if the speaker of the poem is very defensive. She's blaming the reader. She's saying, when you see me sitting quietly like a sack left on the shelf, there's this sense of being forgotten, and there's this sense of almost being bitter. And because the title is about aging, we think of this idea of the subject growing older and older and being more ignored. Don't think I need your chattering. I'm listening to myself. So again, a direct address in this kind of this verb chattering, which is continuous. It's a present continuous. So chattering, it's happening now. Don't think I need your chattering. There's a sense that perhaps the speaker is defensive or bitter because she doesn't want to be pitied. It's quite interesting that there's this defensiveness and this bitterness alongside the simile like a sack left on the shelf. And again, I've just noticed there's sibilance there as well. There's that unpleasant hissing sound, isn't there, in that simile? The simile itself is very negative and unpleasant, and on top of that, the sound of it, the hissing sound, is again adds to this unpleasantness, like a sack left on the shelf. Don't think I need your chattering. This is also an imperative. Imperative is an order. She's commanding the reader or whoever she's talking to. She's saying, don't think I need your chattering. I'm listening to myself. Hold, stop. Don't pity me. Hold, stop your sympathy. Exclamations. There's this repetition of exclamations, repetition of hold. this sense of insistence, sense of command. Stop your sympathy. Again, this repetition of the verb stop. Stop your sympathy. So understanding if you got it, otherwise I'll do without it. So again, there's a sense that the speaker is saying, if you understand my position, then that's fine, but otherwise I don't need your pity. When my bones are stiff and aching and my feet won't climb the stair, I will only ask one favour, don't bring me no rocking chair. Again, she's not asking for pity. When you see me walking, stumbling, I've got this list of verbs. And notice how it goes from walking to stumbling. There's this sense of age within the verbs as the verb progresses from walking to stumbling. Don't study and get it wrong, because tired don't mean lazy, and everybody ain't gone. Notice the informal language. You get this sense of kind of spontaneousness, as if the speaker is thinking of new things and saying them, she's spewing them out. This also matches with the structure of the poem. It's all one big block. It's almost a speech. It's almost coming to the speaker, and she's kind of thinking of new things to say and almost spewing out her bitterness and her defensiveness. She's saying, stop, I'm sick of this. It's almost as if she's been holding it in. There's a sense of personality there, isn't there? And look at the what we call colloquialisms. Colloquialisms are basically informal speech features in the poem. So we've got don't, that's a contraction. That's, she's not put do not, she's put don't. So it's very informal. Cause, not because, right? That coordinating conjunction has been shortened. Look at ain't, not isn't, but ain't. Again, another colloquialism, right? And colloquialism, spelled like that. So colloquialism, colloquialism. And that's informal as well. That also matches with this informal personality that's being formed. I'm the same person I was back then. A little less hair, a little less chin. Again, we've got a lot of repetition, haven't we? A lot less lungs and much less wind. But ain't I lucky I can still breathe in. So again, this repetition of a, little, less. This repetition gives this sense of maybe that the speaker is sick of repeating herself. Maybe she's repeated herself a lot. Maybe, again, it just stresses this informal kind of language, and it gives the speaker personality. And you think back to the title, it's about aging. So you imagine that the speaker is old. By now, you know, you definitely get the sense that the speaker is old. She's a bit bitter. She doesn't want to be pitied for her age. She's saying, but ain't I lucky I can still breathe in. There's this sense that the ending gives the speaker an extra sense of personality. She's saying, don't pity me because I can still breathe in. And honestly, this is posed as a question, isn't it? But ain't I lucky I can still breathe in? But there's no question mark. Isn't that interesting? There's a sense of the speaker being very confident. This confidence that shines through. There's this personality that shines through. And even through the structure, it's one big lump. It's very overwhelming. You can almost see the overwhelming personality shining through the structure. And again, I want to go back to the exclamation marks here, this kind of sudden verb, hold, stop. You get the sense that the speaker is perhaps shouting, she's perhaps commanding. You know, she's a strong presence. She's strong despite her age. She's strong, and she doesn't need to pause. There's no stanzas. It's just one big clump, and she knows exactly what she's talking about. And she has gratitude, but ain't I lucky I can still breathe. And she's grateful that even though she is old and she has less. Yeah, you've got this repetition of this adjective less. There's a sense that even though her body is less, you know, in some way she's got less of this, she's got less of that, she's still lucky. And this verb lucky, it has the same first letter as less, and so there's this alliteration of L which draws attention to what is involved in this alliteration. We've got little, less, and then at the end we've got this verb lucky, and we see how that alliteration changes less to lucky. So there's this sense that what we see of the subject, she is an old woman, that she has not much, that she's less, she's not got much hair, she's got less chin, she's put on weight, but what the speaker sees is that she is lucky to even be alive. It doesn't matter, she doesn't need sympathy, she still considers herself lucky. And so this poem is very interesting. It gives a sense of defensiveness, of bitterness at the beginning, and at the end it gives a sense of gratitude, a sense of certainty, and a sense of confidence as well. So here you go. I analysed the poem. I'm really sorry about my writing, but my writing isn't what's important. What's important is that you see me analyze this poem, and obviously I haven't analyzed it to its full extent. I didn't want to go into too much detail. I just wanted you to get an idea of what it means to begin with a plan. And this would probably be my plan. I've done it in less than 10 minutes really. As I get into it and as I pick out the main points that shine out to me, I would probably, if I was doing an essay, go into a lot more detail. But look, I've picked out the points that are important to me. I've picked out the points that shine out to me. And when I start writing my essay, this should hopefully encourage me to go into a lot more detail. It doesn't take that long. Just relaxed, easygoing, picking out what you see and trusting in yourself as an English critic and as a poetry critic. You'll be fine.